So, what if the story we've all heard about Satan, the fallen angel, is completely wrong? I came across a really interesting perspective that argues the adversary wasn't some cosmic mistake, but actually a necessary part of a much bigger divine plan. Let's dig into that idea and see just where it takes us.
I mean, we all know the classic tale, right? This brilliant, perfect angel named Lucifer gets filled with pride, decides he can take on God himself. Then there's a huge war in heaven, he gets cast out, and boom, he becomes Satan, the ultimate bad guy. It's a story that has shaped so much of our culture for, well, centuries.
But here's the twist. What if that's all it is? Just a really popular story. The argument we're going to explore today claims that this whole fallen angel narrative, it has no real basis in Scripture. Now, that's a pretty huge claim, and it kind of forces us to ask, okay, if that's not how it happened, then what's the real story?
Right, so if he wasn't a fallen angel, what was he? This is where the whole thing gets really fascinating, because it proposes a totally unconventional origin for the being we call Satan. Okay, this slide really gets to the heart of it. On one hand, you have the popular theory of a good angel gone bad. But on the other hand, this source claims something completely different, that this being was created from the very beginning with one specific job, to be the adversary. This completely flips the script from a story about rebellion to a story about, well, divine intention.
The logic here starts from a simple but really profound theological idea. If everything was created through God, well then everything has to include Satan, right? He couldn't have just popped out of nowhere. This view argues that he had to be part of that original creation.
And this argument points to Scripture to back it up, like John 8:44. Now, notice the key phrase here, from the beginning. The interpretation is that this doesn't mean at some point after he was created. No. The idea is that this was his nature from the absolute start. He didn't become a man-killer, he was created that way.
And then you have 1 John 3:8, which is used to really hammer this point home. Again, there's that phrase, from the beginning. The implication here is that sinning wasn't a choice he made down the line, it's his core function. It's literally what he was designed to do from the moment he came into existence.
So, this all leads to a massive question, doesn't it? If he was created on purpose, what could that purpose possibly be? Why would a perfect divine plan include a being whose entire job is to cause trouble?
So really, why would you build an opponent into the system from the get-go? Well, this perspective suggests it's all about contrast. I mean, how can you truly understand or demonstrate strength without a challenge? How do you appreciate light without knowing darkness? The opposition exists to reveal qualities that would otherwise just be abstract ideas.
The key concept they use to explain this is the idea of a foil. Like in a story. The villain's evil and scheming is what makes the hero's goodness and courage shine even brighter. The darkness provides the perfect background to see the light.
And this quote kind of says it all. The opposition itself has a divine purpose. In this view, it's through the adversary's challenges that God's attributes, his wisdom, his power, his love, can actually be demonstrated in a real, tangible way. Without that conflict, they're just words.
But for this to work, the adversary couldn't just be some minor annoyance. No, he had to be a genuine threat, powerful, cunning, a truly worthy adversary. Because think about it, the greater the challenge, the more glorious and meaningful the final victory is.
Okay, so that's the theology, but how does all of this actually translate to the world we live in right now? Let's take a look at what the source says the adversary's job is today.
So first, this view defines our current time as the present wicked aeon. Now, just think of eon as a distinct age or a long chapter in the divine plan. And during this specific chapter, Satan is permitted to operate as the god of this eon, which means he has a whole lot of influence over the world's systems.
Now, listen to the language here, an unchallenged right. This presents Satan not as some rogue agent going off script, but as someone operating within permitted boundaries. When he claims the saints to sift them like grain, he's basically doing his job as a tester of faith. It's his assigned role.
And his objectives are super clear and focused. For believers, the goal is to shake their faith. For unbelievers, it's to blind their minds, using what the source calls myths and errors to keep them from seeing any kind of truth. His primary weapon isn't brute force, it's deception, and it's aimed right at the mind.
So, what's the takeaway for a believer who is experiencing all this opposition?
Well, the argument here is that these trials aren't just pointless suffering. They're actually a critical part of spiritual growth and development. And you can really break down the purpose of these trials into 3 stages. First, the opposition acts like a refiner's fire. It tests faith and makes it stronger. Second, that very struggle is meant to create humility, forcing you to rely on a higher power instead of your own strength. And finally, it's this whole process, being tested, being humbled, that ultimately prepares someone for their true purpose and service.
So when you put it all together, this framework presents evil not as some cosmic accident or a plan gone wrong, but as an essential ingredient. It's the necessary darkness on the canvas that allows the full spectrum of light, God's power, His wisdom, and His love to truly be seen and understood.
And that leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about. If the primary source of opposition in the world is actually a necessary part of the divine plan, created for a specific purpose, how does that force us to rethink the very nature of evil and what its ultimate role in the universe really is?